As we gather this Sunday, we have some pretty incredible texts, some powerful texts that draw us into conversation, that invite us to think of a worldview that is perhaps larger than we would imagine, or perhaps like to imagine. As we gather this day, we have the story of Jesus' ascension into heaven. We also have this text of Jesus on the night before he is handed over to the authorities, praying fervently. Each of these texts invite us into a large conversation about what it means to look to this Holy One, sent by God, calling us to new ways of living. Now, as we think about these texts, there are a couple of words that I would like to put out before you. Those two words are reckless abandonment. What do those two words mean to us today? Reckless abandonment. Now let's start with this first reading from the book of Acts. What does it mean for us as people of faith to look to this Jesus who has dwelled among the people, and now to journey with him outside of the city, and to stand with the disciples and watch? To watch as this one is lifted up into heaven. Now, if you are like me, perhaps you cannot get this image out of your mind of the whole beam me up, Scotty, and Jesus just evaporating and rising into the heavens, perhaps to some distant starship or some distant heaven that we have yet to imagine. But we are left there with the disciples on the ground, watching the ankles, the toes, and the dirty feet rise up before us, and are left wondering, what does it mean for this Holy One of God to go to another place and to leave us here? I remember myself getting my first own dog. And I lived in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and I loved to take her everywhere with me. But when I would take her to the post office or to the restaurant where I worked and would leave her outside, she would go crazy, barking, getting so frustrated that I had left her in that place all alone. She would watch intently as I would walk into the door, and then the barking would ensue. And no matter who else came along to try to comfort her, it was to no avail. I think of us standing in that place as Jesus is taken off into heaven and going a little bit crazy. First off, feeling alone in that moment. This one that has taught and healed, who has proclaimed God's realm, God's new life here among us, isn't here anymore to teach us, at least not in the same way. Isn't here to stand with us, heal us, give us hope, at least not in the same way. And so oftentimes in our churches, we have adapted our theology, or the bigger word, our Christology. How we look to this Holy One, this Messiah, this Christ. And so now we proclaim that there is this Jesus who reigns from on high with God. And we are left looking up to the sky, and if you look around, people often raise their heads, raise their hands to the heavens, to this one who reigns supreme. This one who has gone in victory and will come back in victory. This becomes a rather high Christology, that Jesus reigns with God. It's not a bad thing, but it can be challenging. Because what does it mean for us here and now? It leaves us in our reckless abandonment to wonder what heaven is all like, what it is about. And we come up with lots of different theories or understandings. The angels, the choirs, singing in heavens, the clouds, perhaps the big man with the beard, and Jesus right there with him. Or perhaps you've adapted your theology of heaven into one of love, of energy, of light. Perhaps you have looked to a way that God's love dwells beyond our own flesh and bone. And this becomes a place of wonder, of reckless abandonment on our part. There's a wonderful story about two theologians of this last century, Karl Barth and Paul Tillich. And after Paul Tillich's death, his passing, his friends and family called Karl Barth to let him know. And as the story goes, Karl Barth's one comment on the phone that day was, "Well, now he knows." In a sense, referring to Paul's great struggle or question about what heaven is like and what God's ground of being is like. But we are left to imagine and to wonder. However, not too long. For you will notice in this text that we are pushed back down and our eyes are told to look out into the world and not up at the heavens. These two men who appear talk to the followers from Galilee and tell them to go back into the world, to live their lives faithfully. And so they go back to Jerusalem. They go back to this upper room, perhaps still fairly secluded. And there, in the upper room, they begin to devote themselves to prayer, to teaching, to conversation. They go back to the ways, or at least a way, that this Jesus has been with them. That he sat among them and he taught them. That he prayed with them. And let's be clear here. Oftentimes we get the male voice, but here we get, at least in a small fashion, the lifting up of women. That even though the men were named, we are told the women were there, as well as Mary, the mother of Jesus. That together as a new community, they were looking out boldly in prayer and teaching, in holy living.